Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm talking about episode 11 from season 3, The Job. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. And if you were wondering about how I'm doing these, at the moment I'm taking them in order and then skipping over episodes that I have already covered in the past. Hope you're enjoying the sequential look at the Waltons. This is another episode that was directed by actor-director Ivan Dixon. Early in the episode, you see Mary Ellen reading out loud from a book about Florence Nightingale as John Boy works on some sort of a task. He finishes up and he is on his way to go have an interview about a part-time job. So off he goes. Grandma gives him his lunch and he heads out. When he arrives, he is out here on, I believe this was part of Midwestern Street, along where you might have seen Mrs. Brimmer's house, Mary Ellen and Kurt's house, and he arrives at this house. He tries knocking at the door. Nobody answers. So he goes around to what appears to be a side gate that is not fully closed. He kind of knocks and he goes in. I did notice as he entered into this little patio, backyard area, garden area, that this would have been filmed inside on the soundstage, because I can kind of tell by that backdrop that you can see beyond the gate. Once inside, John Boy meets Ruth Thomas and her mother. Her mother wants to hire someone to read out loud. Initially, she says to both of them, but then Ruth pipes up and says, no, it's really to read to me, because as you can tell, I'm blind. She's very resentful and isn't particularly interested in having somebody come and babysit her. And she says she doesn't care if he comes back or not. John Boy isn't sure that he wants the job, but Mrs. Thomas is desperate to try to help Ruth in some way, because she is withdrawing behind this hard outer shell and is becoming quite a different person than who she was before a bout of scarlet fever left her blind. Back at home, Mary Ellen is working on some techniques and some different nursing aspects, bandaging up people. She's basically bandaging up most of the family. Initially, we see poor Reckless with a splint on and another bandage, and he looks so pitifully at Elizabeth when she heads over to bring him back. What a tolerant dog. And then we find out that she practically has mummified Jim Bob because of various different injuries. She is practicing for some sort of a test, some sort of a first aid test, and is clearly has volunteered all of her siblings to have various different injuries. They have chosen injuries for each other for Mary Ellen to then practice on. At dinner, John Boy tells the family about this potential job and that he isn't sure if he wants to take it or not, because Ruth doesn't seem to want somebody there and he just isn't sure how it will play out. Mary Ellen thinks he should take the job because clearly she needs help, and why wouldn't he help her? She goes over to get another pie for dessert and puts a blindfold on herself, and then in trying to pick up the pie, drops the pie because she has this blindfold on, and just talks about how terrible she thinks it must be to be blind. I remember when I was working on this episode, kind of at home, trying to work out some of what would be going on here, that I actually did try like blindfolding myself and seeing what it might be like to try to navigate around my house without the aid of sight, just learning distances and things like that. And it was quite a different experience. Later that night, John Boy and Mary Ellen have a brief conversation where she explains to John Boy that when she is feeling lonely and doesn't feel like talking to anybody, that she reads a book. And it's because of John Boy, because of what books have meant to him and what his experience has meant to the rest of the family, that she has learned to appreciate books because of him. And it makes her feel less lonely, and she thinks that Ruth must be the loneliest person in the world. This does impact John Boy, and he does decide that he's going to take the job and asks Mary Ellen, what do you think I should read? And Mary Ellen sort of says, I think whatever you read will be perfect. As the children head home from school, they're crossing the bridge over by Drusilla's pond, and Elizabeth is trailing behind and climbs up onto the hand railing of the bridge. Someone looks back and sees her up there and scolds her because she knows she's not supposed to do that unless she is holding Jason or Mary Ellen or someone's hand. They get her down, and she's just it's an experiment. She thought she was halfway across the bridge and she's trying to make it all the way across, but they make her get down and they head on. Mary Ellen says that she's going to stay behind a bit and she'll see them back home. And then I go down sort of near this brook area where the water is going over rocks and stuff, and I close my eyes and try to use my other senses and once again imagine what it might be like if I didn't have sight, to hear the birds, to hear the water. And then I go down into the water and feel the water and start feeling through stones, looking for one that has some sort of an interesting feel to it. And I do find one. I love this lovely family sequence of an evening. The parents and John Boy are sitting on the front porch while the children are playing an impromptu game of softball. And I love how I'm pitching and Elizabeth gets a hit. Cammie made contact with that ball and we sort of throw her out or whatever, but I just thought it was very sweet. And then the grown-ups talk about the whole thing with John Boy's job opportunity. As John Boy is heading off the next day to go start his job reading to Ruth, Mary Ellen runs up and stops John Boy, and thinking maybe it's silly, but she gives him the stone that she found for Ruth and explains how she searched around for one that she thought was interesting, and she hopes maybe Ruth will like it. And John Boy thinks it's very sweet and says he promises he will give it to Ruth. John Boy's job proceeds. He reads various different things to Ruth, and as he begins to feel that maybe they are making some headway and that Ruth is enjoying herself, and he's maybe making contact with her, he actually invites her to come visit Waltons Mountain. She has no interest in doing that. I liked, as he was reading at this point, that I recognized that he was reading The Importance of Being Earnest, one of probably my favorite Oscar Wilde stories, plays, and just a fun piece. And then he does give Ruth the gift from Mary Ellen, and Ruth really does not take it well, and she is very condescending and basically says, "Oh, how perfect, what a perfect gift, a stone for someone who's stone blind." And she drops it on the floor. John Boy tries to explain that that isn't what Mary Ellen meant, and they have a little bit of a confrontation, and John Boy basically says that she is using her blindness as an excuse to push everybody away, and that his sister spent time choosing this gift to just do something kind for her. And he kind of tells her off and says that she is just engaging in a lot of self-pity, and he leaves. Ruth is a little taken aback by that, and then she has a conversation with her mother when she comes home and says, "I need to talk to you." And they talk. John Boy nears home. He sees Olivia playfully hitchhiking when she recognizes his car. He picks her up, and Olivia says that she was just at Ike's and there's a phone message for John Boy. It is from Ruth. And she says she would like to come visit Waltons Mountain, and she will arrive the next day around noon. John Boy finds this very encouraging. Ruth arrives and meets the family, and she confesses to John Boy that she has decided that she wants her life back, and this is a first step to that. The family has arranged a picnic down by Drusilla's pond, and at one point, Mary Ellen and Ruth talk, and Mary Ellen speaks about how she came to this little area with the brook and what she did in trying to imagine what it was like. And Ruth talks about how she had hoped before that she would be a teacher. Mary Ellen has confessed that she's interested in being a doctor or a nurse, and Ruth thinks that's appropriate because she can tell that Mary Ellen is very interested in helping people. Mary Ellen on the other hand, talks about Helen Keller. Does Ruth know about Helen Keller? And she had much more to overcome than Ruth does, and that there's places that teach people, and feels like Ruth could still pursue this dream. And I think Ruth finds that endearing, that Mary Ellen's enthusiasm on her behalf. John Boy comes to let them know that it's time to pack up, and Mary Ellen heads on back, and John Boy is walking Ruth back with Elizabeth, and then Ruth is a little chilly, and John Boy says that he will run and fetch a sweater for her, and Elizabeth is going to stay with Ruth. John Boy lets Ruth know where the edge of the handrail is for the bridge, and but while Ruth is waiting, Elizabeth climbs back up onto that railing and starts walking along it. Ruth is talking to her, not realizing where she is, and then at some point Elizabeth says something, and Ruth is trying to find her. Where is she? And Elizabeth gets startled, falls off the bridge. Ruth is now absolutely frantic about where Elizabeth is and tries to go find her, and is trying to feel around, in the muddy water, the edge of the pond and stuff, and shouting for help. And John and John Boy and Olivia all run to kind of find out what's going on and find Elizabeth. She's okay, she's a little shaken, and find Ruth, who John Boy helps get out of the water. She is just frantic and beside herself because of what happened. John Boy wants to check on Elizabeth and says, here, just stay here for just a moment. Takes her by a tree, and John Boy goes over to make sure Elizabeth's okay. And when he turns around, Ruth is gone. John Boy starts following her. Ruth is just stumbling along, trying to find her way along the path, and John Boy catches up with her, and he knows, he explains, he tells Ruth that he understands that she feels like she's failed and she should never left home, and basically talks her down. And Ruth does recognize that she got scared, but that it's not a reason to give up again and crawl back into the shell and just give up on her life again. So there's a very strong moment there between John Boy and Ruth. By the end of the episode, Ruth has decided that she really does want to move forward with her life. So John Boy has had a real strong impact on her and helped her to move forward with her life. I found this a very impactful episode for me because of the topic it raised and making me more aware of having to explore what this might be like for another person. So people ask me sometimes what I took away or what I might have learned in doing these episodes. And here's a real example of feeling that I learned something valuable. Thank you very much for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. I will be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, more of your questions in a segment of Ask Judy, and I will also be sharing my final segment of my conversation with Cammie Kotler, where we talk a little bit more about her life since the Waltons. I hope you'll join me for that. Thanks for watching.